My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and for April Fool's Day, it seemed kind of fitting to continue my extreme nitpick of the Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson, especially in light of the fact that I actually do think they're great cinema and have relatively few flaws. But in this one, we're going to really ramp it up a notch just to, make it more April Fool's-ish, I guess. So, where I left off last time, we were, Frodo had left the Shire, he had met Strider and things like that. Now we're going to pick up and we're going to get a lot of really interesting stuff really up front. For example, we get this flash to Gandalf imprisoned in Isengard and some of the things that are going on there. And Saruman is growing orcs out of the ground. In and of itself, this is already really weird. I mean, how do you grow living people out of the ground? But the thing is, we know from the movie itself, I don't think we've seen this scene yet, but Saruman is going to tell Lurtz, the mini-boss of the movie, that elves were the origins of orcs. And we know elves reproduce kind of like men do, so how are they growing in... You just don't even want to ask the question anymore. So it's like the level of suspension of disbelief you have to go to imagine orcs coming out of the ground when they really should be reproducing like every other animal and humans is, let's just say it boggles the mind. Now, shortly after the attack on Weathertop, which we already talked about, we also get this scene where Arwen comes on Aragorn while he's trying to find Athelas. And of course, in the scene, we get this cutesy little, which I think this scene is silly regardless, but, to give it the extreme nitpick version, she comes up behind him, puts her sword to his throat, and says, "What's this? A ranger cut off his guard?" Which... there's a number of things wrong with this if we really want to get nitpicky with it. One of them being, why is Arwen out there? Like, from a cinematic standpoint, okay, the answer obviously is we want a character that we're not just going to drop 10 seconds later once we leave Rivendell, right? So in the book, of course, we get Glorfindel, and he shows up at the Council of Elrond, and then he's done. There's no more Glorfindel for the rest of the story. Whereas we are going to see Arwen again, because she's going to marry Aragorn. So, cinematically, you can understand why you would pick her. From a logical narrative standpoint, it makes very little sense, especially given what we learned later. Elrond is really not into the whole Aragorn-Arwen romance thing, and he's also extremely overprotective of Arwen. So why would he send her out, of all people? And if he sent her out, you would... think that just doesn't make sense. But if he didn't send her out, you'd think we would also get a scene where he's berating her like, you really weren't supposed to do that. Why did you do that? I could have sent, Glorfindel. Something like that. But no, we don't get any of that. So it's like, that's the first problem with this scene from a nitpicky point of view. Another one is, why on earth is she putting her sword to his throat? Like, that's a really good way to have accidents happen. That's just silly. It's also a bad idea to just be wasting time like that, and as an elf, she could almost certainly have noticed by now that he's rummaging around for Athelas, which means she knows what Athelas is used for, so why on earth would she be holding him up from doing what he's trying to do with the Athelas, whatever it is? Also, this is a really good example of, wow, how lucky is this moment, where, she just happens upon Aragorn well off the main road, in the middle of the woods. Like, you could explain this, of course. You could say that, she saw him from the road because she's got really keen eyes and because she's an elf and whatever. But it's like, it just looks really absurdly lucky. In the book, at least, you have the example, not example, but the way they meet up with Glorfindel is they're literally right off the road and about to get back on it, and he's galloping down the road, and he doesn't see him until Aragorn's like running down and trying to call out his name. That is lucky, but I mean, he's riding the road and they're on the road or about to be on the road. So it's not quite the same level of Wow, that's really lucky. So there's that. Finally, Arwen's own words, "What's this? A ranger caught off his guard," is kind of a cue that Strider and rangers in general are not usually caught off their guard. And in this particular scenario, where we've literally just had Sam remind us, or not Sam, I think it was Mary actually say, "They're close," because we just heard the Nazgul like crying to each other. We know they're nearby. Why on earth would Aragorn be so off his guard as to let somebody sneak up on him? Okay, you could make the argument maybe that, well, he's expecting like Nazgul with their, really heavy boots to make tons of noise, and so he's not worried about being snuck up on, whereas an elf is going to be really light on their feet and not make a whole lot of sound. And but I mean, he would still be keeping an eye out, for things in the distance because you don't want to be caught off guard. Like, and yet there he is, not paying any attention, and somebody gets behind him with a sword. It's kind of absurd, actually, when you think about it. Moving right along, we get another scene with Arwen involving the Nazgul, and that, of course, is where the river basically wipes out the Nazgul. And this is not a logical narrative standpoint. There's nothing illogical, but this is one of those stupid things that happens in every stinking movie. It never fails. The only time you see something happen that's different than this is when a movie is making fun of other movies that do this, it seems. And that is the idea of, oh, there's a danger, and the danger is taking a linear path, and I'm going to run in the exact same path so that I can be overtaken by or very narrowly escape the linearly traveling danger. So the Nazgul are trying to cross the river. Arwen makes the river flood, and it's coming down to them. And instead of just finishing crossing the river so that they can get to Arwen and Frodo and get the bloody ring, they decide, oh no, let's turn our horses, who are not really in a position to turn very easily because we're all bunched up together, and run straight down the river where we're sure to get crushed by the flood. It's bad enough when some things like this happen in movies, and it's kind of understandable. But the Nazgul are already facing perpendicular to the river. They already have a goal that's perpendicular to the river. It's hard to turn to be parallel with the river. Like, everything is against this happening, and yet they do it anyway. It's like, Peter, why did you do that? So I really just could not leave this one off the list, because if you're going to extremely nitpick anything, this one obviously has to be nitpicked. Frodo wakes up and Gandalf remembers, does not tell apparently, his story of captivity with Saruman and his escape. And what we see is that Saruman is like throwing him around the rooftop of Orthanc, rooftop being kind of a silly term here, obviously, but he's using his staff like he did earlier to, move Gandalf around on, this surface. And then Gandalf jumps off and lands on an eagle, and the obvious question here is, why doesn't Saruman go and just knock Gandalf off the eagle and make him fall to his death? I mean, it's kind of like Star Wars with the Force. We know that Jedi can move things with their minds, but they conveniently only do it when it's cool for the plot. And then they don't do it when it would be extremely useful, but get them out of something a little too easy. Watch Star Wars again with that in mind, and it'll ruin the movie for you, I promise. But here it's the same thing. We have just had 2 scenes of Saruman and Gandalf in one of them moving people around by using staff magic, and now that Gandalf jumps off the roof onto an eagle, apparently it doesn't work anymore. Okay, is there a distance limit to the way this magic works? Because, inside Orthanc, when they were doing this, Saruman was kind of far away from Gandalf at certain points while they were, magicking each other around in different ways. So it doesn't seem like they've really exceeded that distance initially here, but, whatever. I'm just, again, extreme nitpick. So there's another scene coming up in Rivendell itself involving Frodo, and that scene is when Sam is packing up and Frodo's like, I thought you wanted to see the elves. Why are you in such a hurry? And Sam, basically says, well, I thought now that you've done what we came to do, we'd be off home. And Frodo pulls out the ring and says, I am ready to go home. And there's two things wrong with this. One of them has nothing to do with logical coherence necessarily, but why is Frodo pulling out the ring? He just pulls it out like it's necessary to see it in order to talk about it. Like, what in the world is the point of doing that? Why can't he just say, the ring will be safe here in Rivendell, I am ready to go home? It just seems like such a weird thing to do, to just pull the ring out for absolutely no real reason. But the other thing is, and I think I've talked about this in another video where I've kind of criticized points that Peter Jackson made, why does Frodo think it's safe to go home? He knows that the Nazgul are looking for Shire and Baggins. Just on the surface of it, getting out of Rivendell seems like a really dangerous thing to do. Granted, the Nazgul have been, kind of wiped out temporarily, at least by the flood of the Bruinen, but do you really want to go back and just live in the Shire where there's basically no protection at all and just hope to goodness that Sauron has given up the idea of searching for Baggins just because he probably doesn't have the ring anymore? I mean, the problem with that is if Baggins is somebody that Sauron has his eye on, no pun intended, then he's not likely to forget that Baggins possessed the ring for a long time and caused him a lot of trouble getting it back. He's going to want revenge. At a bare minimum. So it just really doesn't make sense that Frodo's like, oh yeah, now that I'm done with this, I could just go home. And of course, he's not even thinking about the fact that giving up the ring is going to be extremely hard. Which luckily that never has to happen. But yeah, the way this scene is done feels kind of weird to me. Alright, now we get to the Council of Elrond. And unlike in the book, where Elrond says, I haven't actually summoned all of you here. You've all just kind of arrived at the nick of time, which seems kind of providential. He doesn't use those words, actually, but that's the idea that he gets across. In here, movie Elrond says, you have been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor. And later we will get a confirmation that he means this quite literally. Because in the book, he uses the same term, but then he says, I say summoned, but I didn't call any of you. In the movie, we get a confirmation in a flashback scene with Denethor, Boromir, and Faramir later on, where Denethor will actually say Elrond of Rivendell has called a meeting. So Elrond called a meeting long enough ago that Boromir could get all the way to Rivendell in time for it, which is kind of interesting, given that we know that the trip down the mountain range, Gandalf will say later, we must hold this course west of the Misty Mountains for 40 days. Now, granted, he's on foot. Boromir was on a horse. But you still can't travel, vastly faster on a horse than you can on foot. Horses need rest too, people. So it's not like you could just jaunt up to Rivendell from Gondor in a couple days, or even a week. That's not happening. So when did Elrond have time to call all these people for a council? Like, we know for sure, based on the timing of everything, that Gandalf could not have gotten to Rivendell that much before Frodo. That just really isn't possible. So it's not like Gandalf was there to warn him about it. How did Elrond know to call a council about the ring? And when did this happen? Like, Gandalf, the last we knew, left the Shire and went directly to Isengard and was stuck there until, based on the way the movie plays out, at best a couple days before Frodo got there? I mean, it just does not seem very reasonable that Elrond could have actually had time to do this. So, yeah, how did he manage to call this council? Alright, and during the Council of Elrond, we get this kind of tense scene where Boromir's like, and what would a ranger know of this matter? He's no mere ranger. We get this whole thing. And Legolas says he is Aragorn, son of Arathorn. You owe him your allegiance. Okay, so he's got a name? Boromir immediately reacts like, he says, Aragorn, so this is Isildur's heir. And it's like, how would you know that just based off his name? Like, there is no indication in the movie how he would have figured that out. There's just nothing in the scene at all that explains any of this. There's nothing in any of the movies ever to explain this. We don't ever get a really detailed history on the lineage from Isildur down to Aragorn. And in fact, the movie seems to imply at certain points that Isildur was both the last king of Gondor and the last king of Arnor, which means, I mean, that makes you wonder a whole lot of things right off the bat, because that just has a lot of problems. But if Isildur was the last king of Gondor and Arnor, how would anybody, based on a name, associate Aragorn with Isildur? It just doesn't even come close to making sense. So the fact that Legolas sputs a name out is just like, okay, so he's got this name, and his dad's name sounds pretty similar. That's kind of common in Middle-earth. Big whooping deal? How are we supposed to take anything from that? So then Legolas again kind of steps into it, because whenever Boromir says, one does not simply walk into Mordor, he, goes on this thing where he talks about how hard it would be, and not with 10,000 men could you do this. And Legolas immediately stands up and says, "Have you heard nothing Lord Elrond has said? The ring must be destroyed." It's like, what has Elrond actually said so far? He did say, "You have but one choice. The ring must be destroyed." And he never really explained much about why that is, or never discussed any alternatives, or... So Legolas really just seems to be appealing to authority here, like, Elrond is clearly the authority we should be listening to here, and he said we have to destroy it, and so just listen to him. Not considering the fact that Boromir has basically just said, okay, so like that's an option, but it seems basically impossible. Should we consider others? I mean, that's not how arguments work. At least, that's not how good arguments work. A good argument is one where you say, here's the conclusion I think we should reach, and here are reasons A, B, C, D, and E why that conclusion is the right one. Well, I think this other conclusion is correct, and here are reasons W, X, Y, Z why I think that conclusion is the right one. No, Legolas just commits the immediate fallacy of appeal to authority, and he's like, nope, Elrond said it, we're done. It's like, it's a council. I thought this was a council, not a monarchy. Like, what are we doing here? So again, like, extreme nitpick, this is kind of a silly way for Legolas to go about, making his point, is what I'm getting at. Because in the context, and given what Elrond has actually said and what Boromir just got through saying, his response does absolutely nothing except raise the stress level. That's literally all that does. Once the Fellowship gets on the road, of course, we get this scene where the flock of Crebain come and fly over the group, and then they get out, and Gandalf says, I forget exactly how he says it, but something, Spies of Saruman, the passage south is being watched. I mean, you already knew Saruman lived in Isengard, which is in pretty much the Gap of Rohan, and you knew that he was after the ring, and you needed a flock of birds to tell you that he was going to be on the lookout for... Really? Like, this is the first time that you've got an inkling that it might be dangerous to go through the Gap of Rohan? That's the warning sign. Not the fact that he's already a traitor. Like, in the book, Tolkien actually manages this quite logically. They already talked about the fact that, well, we can't go through the Gap of Rohan because we know Saruman's a traitor. Like, that's not an option. And, it doesn't ever come up like, oh, there's birds, so that means it's definitely not safe. We shouldn't go that way now. No, that's really, it doesn't make sense to say that, because they already know Saruman's a traitor, which means they already know it's not safe to go anywhere near Isengard. But in the movie, Gandalf is apparently an idiot. Then we get into Moria, and, there's a lot of funny things that happen in Moria in some ways, but the one that I want to focus on here is when they finally get to Balin's tomb, and then Gandalf says, "He's dead then. It's as I feared." Really? like, you never mentioned this before. And this is another one where I've kind of addressed this in another video before. But here, specifically, I want to focus on his words, because he says he is dead, it's as I feared. Now, Gimli had earlier talked about, his cousin Balin giving them a royal welcome, and then telling Legolas when they walked into Moria, you will enjoy the fabled hospitality of the dwarves. He is assuming the whole time that Balin is alive and running a thriving dwarf colony. And Gandalf never says anything about why he thinks Moria is dangerous. He just says, "No, Gimli, I would not enter Moria unless we had no other choice." Why? Like, from all that we hear from Gimli, it's like we ought to expect a big city of dwarves ready to welcome us with open arms and stuff food down our mouths. Like, why are we worried about it? Now, we do get Saruman's hint about Gandalf knowing that there's a Balrog there, but everything about what we've heard so far is that Gimli, who is probably the one who would know, given that he's got connections to Balin, thinks that everything is fine in Moria, and Gandalf never gives one single reason why he thinks it's a bad idea. And then, when we get to his tomb, he gives this whole, "Yep, I was afraid of that." Really? Because you never mentioned that before. It seems a lot like a post hoc, "Yep, I was right all along." Like, you were right because you say now what you never said before. So, yeah, I'm not buying it, Gandalf. And another one, this one is kind of like the whole, run away from the river, directly down river scene. After the initial sort of encounter with the Balrog, and they're all running around, and they start going down these stairs that they have to hop over big gaps in the stairs, right? Frodo and Aragorn, which by itself is a problem, right? Why would you make the ring bearer the last person to cross the gap? Seems like you'd want to get him across pretty quick, but, that's not even the main point here. Aragorn and Frodo end up being the last two left on the thing. Now, again, cinematically, I understand why they do that, because it maximizes the tension. It's not like I don't understand why they did it. I'm just saying it logically, narratively, doesn't make sense. So they're the last ones on there. More of the stair falls off, making it a longer jump. And they're like, how are we going to make this jump? And then the Balrog is like banging on the walls, and a big rock falls, and it makes it so that the staircase that they're on, the piece that they're on, is now just kind of free-floating, standing on a pivot. And Aragorn and Frodo apparently have exactly the right weight to make it go back and forth depending on which way they lean, which is insane. First of all, the idea that those two guys could make that much of a difference on this huge stone staircase, which has to weigh like multiple tons by the size of it. The fact that they can, have any effect on it at all is basically nonsense. Another problem is, once it starts going one way, they lean back and reverse it. No. Do y'all know how momentum works? Momentum is mass times velocity. The mass of the staircase is so much greater than the mass of Aragorn and Frodo combined that the momentum of that thing, even moving as slowly as it is, could not possibly be reversed by Aragorn and Frodo doing anything. Even if they were off pushing at the best leverage point with their arms against a solid backing, there is no way they could move all of that. It's just not possible. So we're literally talking about a scene that defies the laws of physics here, guys. It's just, again, cinematically, it looks cool. It's a great tense moment, but man, it is just so unrealistic. And then finally, we get the scene where Gandalf confronts the Balrog, and after the Balrog falls down, he starts to slowly turn back, and then the Balrog comes and grabs him with his whip, which apparently just lets go of his leg instantaneously because he doesn't pull him straight down with him. Instead, it just knocks him off enough so that he can then grab, what's left of the bridge and sit there for a second and say, "Fly, you fools." Meanwhile, Boromir is literally keeping Frodo from helping him, and I am left wondering, why is nobody going out there to help Gandalf get back up? In the book, it works in such a way that this is not a problem, because when the Gandalf gets his legs with his whip, he literally pulls him off and down, and he's falling immediately. There's no grabbing onto the bridge or anything like that. And so there's no opportunity for anybody to help him. It's just not a thing. Here, he's hanging on, and there's no reason nobody can go over there and just grab his arm and pull him up. And yet nobody's going to help him. And Boromir is stopping the one person who's even trying. Like, what are you people thinking? You're just going to let Gandalf die for no good reason? Like he can't hold on for more than 3 seconds? You could, I suppose, argue that, well, there's a bunch of goblins shooting arrows, because we do get a little bit of that as they're running out. But Boromir, you've got a shield. Gimli, you're wearing, and Boromir's even wearing armor, and I think Gimli is even wearing armor. Gimli definitely has a helmet. It's like, run a little bit of a risk. It's not like the goblins have hit anybody yet. They're basically stormtroopers in this scene, making another Star Wars reference for fun. So, it's like, what is the harm of going out there? Now, I could see why maybe you'd want to stop Frodo from going out there, because he is the ring bearer. You don't want him going into max danger. But why is literally nobody else doing a thing? Legolas, with his light foot and, agility and everything else, would be the perfect candidate. Just run out there, grab his arm, pull him up, and get off the bridge. No, we're just going to let him sit there and then fall off. Totally unnecessary. It's so stupid. It's just like, why did you do that? Again, cinematic tension, but no logic. So that's part 2 of my extremely nitpicky review of The Fellowship of the Ring. Stay tuned for the next part, which may get me through the rest of the movie, may not. I'm not sure how far I'm going to get. Just depends on how many nitpicks I can find in the next section, but probably I'll wrap up The Fellowship in the next video, and then we can move on to the Two Towers for more nitpicks. But if you're enjoying this series, please do leave a like and a comment down below for the algorithm as well. Let me know if you think I missed anything that I should have extremely nitpicked with extreme prejudice. Subscribe for more content like this. Click the bell icon if you're on YouTube to make sure you don't miss any notifications. And check the description for social and support links. And don't forget to follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter for Tolkien-related trivia questions. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namaste. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially Paul Leone, Nathan Dufour, and Robert Kindling.